Dear learners, I would like to welcome you all for this class on rural economy and its importance in national development. So this lecture is basically a part of our module Indian rural economy. So I would like to start with introduction. So I would like to define what rural economy is all about. It is no need to mention that India basically lives in villages. So this timeless adage famously reiterated by the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, continues to define the nation's economic fabric. So why I am saying this? Because with approximately 65% of its population and 70% of its workforce residing in rural area, India is predominantly a rural country. Now this rural economy, it is not a peripheral segment, but we should consider it as it should be a central pillar of national economy because it contributes significantly to the gross domestic product as well as generation of employment and overall social stability. So that is why what I believe that the developmental trajectory of India is very much linked to the progress of his rural hinterland. So that is why any vision of inclusive and sustainable and holistic national development must therefore place the transformation of the rural economy at its core. Otherwise, any kind of development where rural economy is not considered at its core cannot be considered as a inclusive kind of growth or holistic kind of growth. Now, how can we define a rural economy? To define a rural economy in simple language is very difficult because it is a multifaceted system. Particularly in rural economy of India, that is why it is always called, if you see literature also, it is considered as a complex and multifaceted system that extend beyond the conventional image of agriculture and farming. So what happens whenever we are talking about rural economy, we basically want to talk about agriculture and farming only. So obviously agriculture and farming is the backbone of rural economy. But the problem is that when you want to define rural economy in terms of a academician, you have to be, multidimensional. You cannot confine your definition only in agriculture and farming. So that is why what I am trying to say, while agriculture and allied activities. So whenever we are talking about allied activities, that is basically animal husbandry, forestry, fishing, etc. So while agriculture and allied activities, it forms the traditional backbone, the modern rural economy, it encompasses a diverse range of sectors. So only when you include a diverse range of sectors along with agriculture and farming, such as animal husbandry, forestry, fishing, then you are in a position to give a proper definition of rural economy. Because it includes non-farm activities such as rural manufacturing, agro-processing, handicraft, construction, transport, and a host of service sector enterprises. So that is why now we are in a position to define rural economy. That is why the rural economy can be defined as a collective economic activity encompassing production, consumption, trade, and distribution that takes place in a non-urban geographical area driven by a combination of local resources, human capital, and institutional framework. Now, since we are talking about in this lecture rural economy and specifically Indian rural economy, it is necessary to discuss about size and structure of Indian rural economy. Now, whenever we are talking about size and structure of Indian rural economy, the first parameter, how we can explain the size. So the first parameter or first dimension is the contribution to national income and employment. Now, if you see in terms of number, the sheer size of India's rural economy is monumental. So historically, it has been the primary source of national income and employment. Now, why it is happening? Because if you see, from the time when the Planning Commission started, from the first 5-year plan, so they always put in all the 5-year plans, they always put rural economy at the forefront. So subsequently, when Planning Commission was replaced by Niti Aayog also start to give importance on development of rural economy. So that is why. So if you see the data of Niti Aayog, so you will get the size of the rural economy from those data. So as per the data from Niti Aayog in 1970-71, so rural areas contributed 62.4% of the country's net domestic product and engaged a staggering 84.1% of the total workforce, huge workforce. So this underscored it underscored that India is a predominantly agrarian economy. However, the subsequent decade, from 1970-71, the subsequent decade, what happened? It witnessed a structural transformation. Now, I think no need to mention about economic liberalization, privatization. So, what happened in the first part of the last decade of the previous century? What happened? To increase the competitiveness of Indian economy, what India adopted? India adopted economic reforms. So as a part of economic reform, India tries to liberalize the economy in terms of opening of the economy for foreign export or foreign import, foreign investment. So with the process of this economic liberalization, that means abolishing of the restriction and the rapid growth of urban services and industrial sector, the rural share in national income began a steady decline. So that is why if you see by the year 2011 and 12, the rural contribution to net domestic product had fallen to 46.9% if you compare the figure in 1970-71, which is around 62.4%. Now, the issue is, in contrast to the contribution to national domestic product, which is 46.9%, that means there is a drastic decline, but in contrast to that, the decline in its share to total employment was less precipitous. So that is why it dropping to 70.9% in the same year, that is in 2011-12, as compared to 84.1% in 1971. So what I am trying to say, that this divergence highlights a critical structural issue. What is that structural issue? That means a significant portion of the workforce remains dependent on a sector whose relative contribution to the economy is shrinking. So that is a structural issue. I think Niti Aayog and Indian think tanker must give importance. Now, if you see, next we will discuss about sectoral composition and structural transformation. The internal structure of the rural economy has undergone a profound shift. If you see the shift can be considered as a huge or profound. In 1970-71, agricultural dominated rural NDP with a huge share. But over the next 4 decades, the share steadily declined. And if you see the figure in 2004-5, there is a landmark transition. A landmark transition occurred, and the rural economy became more non-agricultural than agricultural, with agricultural share dropping to 38.9%. So what our perception earlier, our earlier perception is that rural economy is fully dependent on agricultural share. But the problem is that after, if you see the year in 2004-5, there is a structural shift. What happened? The relative share of agriculture dropped to 38.9% in 2004-5. So as of 2011-12, agricultural accounted for 39.2% of the rural NDP, while the non-farm sectors such as manufacturing, construction, and services collectively contributed the remaining 60.8%. So there is a huge structural shift in the rural economy. But you cannot consider it as a negative. It is a positive development on the part of the rural economy. That means that rural economy has gradually they diversified their activities into different sectors. Now this diversification, as I have already told, is a positive sign of economic maturation. That means our rural economy is gradually moving to the part of maturation. So notably, the rural areas now contribute over half. That means around 51.3% in 2011-12, about half of the country's manufacturing output. So debunking the myth that industry is an exclusively urban phenomenon. So earlier, what our perception that industry is an exclusively urban phenomenon. But if you see the contribution of rural economy, it contributes over half, that is 51.3% in 2011-12. That means industries cannot be, now you cannot consider industry as a extremely urban phenomenon. So the construction sector has also been seen a remarkable rise both in output and employment. So it also acting as a major absorber of rural labor. Now, whenever you are talking about rural economy, you cannot keep away or you cannot, eliminate the rural-urban disparity in output and employment. So there is a huge disparity, and this disparity exists in India also, and it is very much prevalent, and that is why we need to discuss about what this urban and rural disparity is. Now, if you go by data, the data reveals that, if you see the data from Niti Aayog and other sources, the data reveals a traveling disparity. While the rural areas contribute nearly 47% in present time of 47% of the national income, they support over 70% of the workforce. So this implies that urban workers on average significantly more productive than their rural counterpart. Why I am saying that? Because if you go by data, they contribute only 47% of the national income, but they support over 70% of the workforce. So if you compare it in urban sector, then urban sector contribute 53% of the national income and they support only 30% of the workforce. So that means there is a huge disparity. So this difference in rural and urban, it leads to increase in disparity in rural and urban per capita income. So this difference in rural and urban per capita income is the direct consequences of this productivity gap. So you can say that, the rural economy, whatever activities or wages in rural sector or activities in rural sector, they are not as remunerative as compared to different sectors in urban areas. So this disparity is a fundamental cause of economic inequality that persists between urban and rural area, fueling migration and social strain. Now, after discussing about rural and urban disparity, now we are in a position to discuss economic, social and demographic characteristics of Indian rural economy. Because these are the factors which may have an impact on the disparity. So what are the social factors? What are the economic factors? What are the demographic characteristics? Now, when you are talking about economic characteristics, so at first, the first characteristics of Indian rural economy is the, if you consider at present, is a commercialization of agriculture. So Indian agriculture has moved significantly from subsistence farming to a commercial and market-oriented system. So factors like green revolution, improved road connectivity and development of regulated market and access to information technology has enabled farmers to produce for the market, though with varying degrees of success and risk. So after discussing the commercialization of agriculture, the second most important you can consider as the economic characteristics of rural economy is the institutional participation. Now what happened? Post-independence, the state has played a pivotal role through land reforms, agricultural extension services, and credit provision via NABARD, regional rural banks, and cooperatives, and massive rural development programs like MNREGA. So, due to these programs or due to this initiative on the part of the government and on the part of the planning commission, what happened? There's an increase in institutional participation by the rural sector. So this has shaped production relations and brought about modernization in rural economy. Now, another very important characteristics of rural economy is the rise of the non-farm sectors. So whenever we're talking about rural economy, we have a habit of discussing about the farm sectors only. But rise of non-farm sectors is one of the important characteristics of modern rural economy. Now, as evidenced by the structural shift, the rural non-farm sector has emerged as a critical driver of growth. So why I am saying that? Because the non-farm sectors, this includes small scale industries, agro-processing units, retail, trade, transportation services, providing alternative livelihood sources beyond agriculture. So that is why there is a huge rise in non-farm sectors in rural economy of India. So these are basically prominent economic characteristics of Indian rural economy, that is commercialization of agriculture, institutional participation, and rise of non-farm sectors in modern times. Now, what are the social characteristics of Indian rural economy, which makes it a unique as compared to rural economy of other countries? Now, the impact of urbanism. Now, if you see, whenever you are talking about rural-urban disparity, whenever you demarcate what is rural and what is urban, it is very difficult. Because unlike the earlier days, rural society nowadays is no longer isolated. Why? Because due to expansion of transportation and communication. So by communication, what I mean, access to television, access to intranet, access to mobile phones. So due to access of those things, due to improvement of transport and communication, that has led to rural urbanism, where urban lifestyle, consumption pattern, and aspiration are rapidly assimilated into village life. So this has led to the disintegration of the traditional joint families, and it also led to emergence of individualism and a growing demand for consumer goods. So if you compare the rural economy in earlier times and rural economy in present times, you will see the huge difference, because nowadays there is a disintegration of traditional joint families, which is a regular, which is a very normal features in earlier times. There is the emergence of individualism, and if you see, there is a growing demand for consumer goods in rural society. Now, another important social characteristics of rural economy is the caste dynamics, which actually plays a huge role in rural-urban disparity. Now, what is caste dynamics? The caste system, while legally, it is, if you see Indian Constitution, legally it was abolished, but it continues to influence the rural, social, and economic hierarchies. It is very much prevalent. So it has historically been, if you see, it has historically been a, springboard for class exploitation. Still it exists, limiting social mobility and access to resources for lower caste, and thereby perpetuating poverty. So that is why, as I have already told, the difference between the per capita income of urban and rural area is basically due to some of the social characteristics which are still prevalent, which still exist in rural economy in India. Now, another important social characteristics of the rural economy is the social customs. Now, if you see, the social ceremonies like wedding and religious function often involve significant expenditure, so leading to indebtedness among the rural household, which can trap families in a cycle of poverty for generations. Due to this is basically due to ignorance or due to peer pressure from different groups. Even they are not able to organize some kind of activities where they make lavish expenditure, but due to the pressure they are bound to make those kind of expenditure, and it creates a huge indebtedness among the rural household, and ultimately they fall into a debt trap, which ultimately results poverty for generations. Now, after discussing economic and social characteristics, we will discuss what are the demographic characteristics of the rural society. Now, whenever we are talking about rural and urban disparity, or whenever we are discussing about rural economy as a distinct from urban economy, one of the important distinction is the difference in the birth rate. And that is why there is always a population pressure in rural areas. So rural areas, if you see, despite lower population growth rate than in the past as compared to the earliest, undoubtedly there's a fall in the growth rate of population as there's a fall in the birth rate, but it still bear the burden of large and dense population. So this exert immense pressure on limited resources like land and water. Another important demographic characteristic, workforce distribution. A majority of the rural workforce, for example, 64.1% in 2011-12 is still engaged in agriculture, a sector which is characterized by widespread underemployment and seasonal unemployment. So that is why also in namesake there is a diversification of the activities, but still in terms of people involved in agriculture, a huge portion of the people, that is 64.1%, are still involved in agriculture, which create the problem of underemployment and seasonal unemployment. Because in most of the rural areas, agriculture, farming is still a seasonal activity. Now, another important characteristics or demographic characteristics of rural economy is the migration. So as I have already told, there is a disparity in the per capita income of a labor in rural as compared to a labor in urban area. There is always a tendency on the part of the labor in rural area to migrate to urban area. So this push of rural poverty, unemployment, and the pool of urban opportunities lead to significant seasonal and permanent migration from rural to urban area. So this rural poverty and unemployment acts as a push factors from rural to urban areas, and urban opportunities act as a pull factors. So as a result, there is a huge migration from rural to urban. So this migration, although act as a safety valve, but also create imbalances in both sending and receiving regions. Now, after discussing the characteristics of rural economy, now we are in a position to discuss the importance and the role of rural sector in the Indian economy. The rural sector role in Indian economic framework is multifaceted and indispensable. You cannot any kind of discussion on Indian economy, rural sector must be in the forefront because there are several factors. One of the most important factors is a contribution to national unity. So what happened? Despite its declining share, the rural economy still contributes nearly half, that is 46.9% of the national income.
So the prosperity of this sector has direct and substantial impact on the country's overall economic health, because it contributes significantly over the years, it contributes significantly to national income. Another one is a source of food and raw materials security. So if you consider about food security, if you consider about raw material security for manufacturing and industrial sector, you have to be dependent on rural economy. Now, agriculture remains the basic source of food supply for India's 1.4 billion people. It is also the primary suppliers of raw materials to a vast segment of Indian industries, including textile, sugar, edible oils, tea, coffee, and agro-processing industries. So, a failure in agricultural production can trigger inflation and disrupt the industrial. So another importance of rural economy is the creation of infrastructure and effective. The development of rural areas necessitates and fuels the creation of infrastructure such as road, warehouses, cold storage, irrigation system, and digital network. So furthermore, as rural income rises, the purchasing power of the massive population creates a huge market for industrial goods, from tractors and motorcycles to consumer durables and financial services, stimulating industrial. Now, another important factor or importance of rural economy is the employment generation and poverty alleviation. The rural sector is the largest employer in the country. We have already discussed about this. So while agricultural capacity to absorb new labor is diminishing day by day, the non-farm sectors, scheme like MNREGA, provide a crucial employment and income support, playing a vital role in the poverty alleviation. Another important contribution of rural sector is the contribution to capital formation and export earning. The rural sector contributes to national capital formation through agricultural taxation, savings in rural financial institutions, and the mobilization of surplus labor for infrastructure projects. So furthermore, the agriculture and allied products like rice, spices, marine product, and cotton textile, it constitute a significant portion of India's export basket, earning valuable foreign exchange. Now, after discussing the importance and role of rural sector in the Indian economy, we will discuss the current state of India's rural economy. Now, if you discuss the current state of Indian rural economy, the Indian rural economy today stands at a very critical juncture, marked by both promising trend and persisting challenges. Now, if you consider the post-2000 growth and structural shift, the period after 2000 shows a very the rural economic growth rate pick up pace, stabilizing its share in the national NDP. The period after 1919 and 2000 show a rural economic growth rate pick up its pace and stabilizing its share in the national NDP. The period or the year from 2004-5 to 2011-12, it witnessed an impressive acceleration, with rural NDP growing at 7.45% annually. So this is basically driven by high growth in manufacturing and consumption, along with a revival of agricultural goods. So this indicates a robust and diversifying economic base. But the problem is that although we are from the figure, it seems like that the figure shows a very rosy picture of the Indian rural economy, but undoubtedly, the rural economy in India, they face persistent challenges in terms of employment opportunities, input-output mismatch, and low productivity. The most pressing concern is the disconnect between output growth and employment generation. So that is why, although there is a growth of output, it may not create, or it is not creating sufficient employment opportunities. So if you consider the period between 2004-5 to 11-12, the rural output grew rapidly but rural employment actually declined at a rate of 0.28% per annum. So that is why it is a kind of jobless growth. So this jobless growth is very alarming. The manufacturing sector, despite shifted to rural areas, has not generated commensurate employment, likely due to capital-intensive methods. So that is why the burden of absorbing labor has fallen on the construction sectors, while with labor-intensive often offers a low wages and informal, insecure. So this indicates that the quality of employment remains a major challenge for the rural economy. Now, the rise of the rural non-farm sectors holds the key to be sustainable rural transformation, because it offers a pathways to diversify income, reduce dependence on monsoon-dependent agriculture, and provide more stable employment. However, what happens for the rural non-farm sectors to realize its full potential? It requires targeted policy support on the part of the government in the form of better access to credit, technology, skill training, and market linkage. Now, what are the causes of rural backwardness? The first cause of rural backwardness is the persistence of poverty and underdevelopment in rural areas, often termed as rural backwardness, which is very complex problem stemming from a confluence of factors. Another important cause is the climatic factors. Indian agriculture is highly susceptible to the vagaries of the monsoon. Drought, flood, cyclone can cause catastrophic damage, pushing farmers into debt and poverty. Demographic factors also create rural backwardness. The high historical rate of population growth has already outpaced the creation of productive assets and jobs, as I have already explained. I will not explain in detail. There are also lots of economic causes, as I have already said. Low agricultural productivity. Many farmers still heavily dependent on traditional method. Unequal distribution of land and asset. Highly secured land ownership. Concentrated resources in a few hands, leaving large population of migrated and landless laborers in a vulnerable state. Unemployment and underemployment is another economic cause that lead to rural backwardness of rural area. A lack of diverse employment opportunities force the people to remain in low productivity agricultural work. Indebtedness is another important economic cause which create rural-urban disparity. There are certain social and personal causes such as low level of education and skill, the caste system, as I have already explained, social custom and fatalism. These are some of the social causes. So thus, in conclusion, what we can say that Indian rural economy is not a relic of the past, but a dynamic and evolving force that is central to the nation's ambition to becoming a developed economy. So its importance in ensuring national food security, providing employment, fostering industrial growth, and maintaining social stability cannot be overstated. However, the path forward requires a nuanced and multi-pronged strategy. The historical dilemma of rural and urban development and agriculture and industry must be integrated in favor of an approach that recognizes their symbiotic relationship and policies. So what it should focus? So for boosting agricultural productivity through investment in irrigation, research and development, and market access while promoting sustainable practices, which will lead to bridging of rural-urban divide through targeted investment in digital connectivity, health, and education to improve human capital. So thus, in conclusion, in the words of Mahatma Gandhi, the future of India lies in its villages. So that is why, to ensuring that this future is prosperous, equitable, and sustainable is the most critical task of India's national development in the 21st century. So the transformation of the Indian rural economy is not merely a welfare objective, it is an economic imperative for unlocking the nation's full potential. Thank you.